Hi, I'm Dan Barker, your friendly neighborhood atheist, and I'm here with Annie Laurie Gaylor. Annie Laurie and I are co-presidents of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. One of the questions we atheists often hear is, if there's no God, what is the purpose of life? Or what is the meaning of life? We'll talk about that during today's show. Something came up, so we had to pre-record today's show earlier this morning, but you can still ask a question and we can respond in a later show. If you do have a question, you can post it as a Facebook comment, or you can send an email to askanatheist@ffrf.org.
So before we talk about our views on the purpose of life, let's hear what a bunch of religious people think is the meaning and purpose of life.
Right.
So, purpose of life is naturally happy life, meaningful life. So, in order to make meaningful life, ultimately, warm-heartedness is the key factor.
That's the initial, primary, foundation, purpose of our lives. To come to recognize, appreciate Almighty God, the Creator.
What is the purpose of life and what is dharma? Dharma is a Sanskrit word which means higher purpose. And the law of dharma says that ultimately the dharma of all of us is to reach enlightenment, unity consciousness, and total freedom from conditioning.
Allah says, I have not created mankind or jinnkind except that they worship me. Which means the test for mankind and jinnkind is that they worship Allah.
Judaism gives us, I think, the most unbelievable answer to this question. Judaism says it in one simple word: pleasure. The entire purpose of existence is for us to get pleasure.
When everything comes together, then you have wonder, then you have truth, then you have love, and you have security. That's what gives life meaning. And you'll find that only God is big enough to do that for you.
There's no other purpose. The purpose of life is to live, and to live totally. To live totally does not mean party every night. To live totally means before you fall dead, every aspect of life has been explored. Nothing has been left unexplored.
So I like that last guy, he was kind of funny. The purpose of life is to live life totally, but some of those other religious people were talking about the purpose of life is to know the Creator, or to find enlightenment, or or what did the rabbi say?
Well, he said to get pleasure, and that kind of bothered me. It seemed very male-dominated. Isn't it also to give pleasure? You know, like, what can I get out of life? And I don't actually think some of these excerpts are all that traditional, Dan. You've picked some untraditional views.
We're going to look at a couple of Christian ones in a moment here.
But even an Orthodox rabbi would not make that, ultra-Orthodox rabbi would not make that statement.
Well, but he went on to say that God doesn't need pleasure. He created human beings, and if you read the Bible, he quoted from the Torah that God wants us to be fulfilled and have a life of pleasure, free from pain and all that.
But I don't think when you're reading the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, that's the main message at all. The message is sin and redemption, and you better obey everything God says. So that's the purpose of life. I think for most traditionally religious people, they think the purpose in life is given to them by a God.
Yeah, that's from top down. I think that's the kind of thing that a modern rabbi says to a modern congregation.
Which we would not argue as much with. Also, this idea of enlightenment, the enlightenment is a wonderful thing, but I don't think that's exactly what he meant.
Yeah, well, he meant enlightenment, you know, the idea of a beyond losing yourself kind of a thing, and then you find total enlightenment, which is what a lot of Eastern ideologies teach about.
Well, so you wrote a whole book about this.
I did. I wrote a book challenging Rick Warren's book, Purpose Driven Life, and
what's your book called?
Mine's called Life Driven Purpose, which just turns it upside down. Because a lot of these religious ideas of purpose are top down. They are like, oh, please, I'm this slave, I'm this subordinate, and I need this father, this commander in the army to give me my marching orders on my purpose, which is what Rick Warren says. It's purpose-driven life from the top. But I think most of us non-believers view life as bottom up. Purpose doesn't come from up there. If we have purpose, it comes from bottom up. But before we talk about that some more, let's look at a couple of Christian
more
ideas.
Traditional views.
Well, William Lane Craig, he's a leading Christian apologist who, by the way, justifies genocide. This is a totally different issue, but he looks all nice and scholarly and academic, but he actually says that the killing of the genocide of the babies in the Old Testament were actually a good thing that God did because of his ultimate purpose. But let's look at what William Lane Craig says about the purpose of life.
And finally, there is an objective purpose for life. God has created us for himself. Our end is to be found in the knowledge of God. This is the fulfillment of human existence, to know God and his love forever.
So we're not here for ourselves. We're here so that we can just know this God, so that he can be praised and he can be glorified. So it is a top-down picture of reality. And then Rick Warren, who wrote the book, The Purpose-Driven Life, has a different take on it.
So if we only get 80 years maybe here on the earth, what on earth am I here for? Well, the Bible teaches that this life is preparation for the next. That we are to practice some things here that get us ready for heaven. And these are the purposes of life.
That's pretty offensive. And so that's really what you were countering in your book. And so put it in a nutshell. What were you saying in life-driven purpose?
Well, okay, so what I say, and I don't represent all atheists. Every atheist might have a different. Some would say the purpose of life is to survive and reproduce. And I think that's really more of a definition of life. That's what life is by definition. I think the good news that we atheists offer to the world is that there is no purpose of life. And it's a good thing there's no purpose of life. Because if there were a purpose of life, that means we would be secondary. We would be these slaves before a dictator handing out the marching orders. So what I would say basically, is that there's no purpose of life, but there's purpose in life. It's not top down, it's bottom up. So
everybody has their own purpose. It can't be given to you by an imaginary being, although some people think they have this purpose.
Yeah.
It's whatever, I think one of the points in your book you say is wherever there's a problem, then there's a purpose in life. Now, hopefully it's not just problems that we're dealing with in life, but there's no shortage of things that we need to do to make this a better world or to make our lives better, and that's partly our purpose. But your purpose would also be musical. You're a musician. Everybody would have their own desires and purposes.
Well, there's many purposes, and they change from moment to moment. And as you say, when there's a problem to be solved, a purpose is aiming at some kind of a goal. There's some kind of a problem. Meaning is different. Meaning is like an expression of, that has some content. But you've got a goal. It could be to avoid predation, or it could be cold or hungry. You need shelter. It could be food. It could be water.
Well,
it could be war.
These are survival purposes.
Yeah.
But then beyond that,
challenges, any challenges, even in art, like you were saying, even in music, you've got a challenge in how are you going to create this? A challenge in science. How are you going to answer this scientific question? You've got some kind of a problem. You've got some kind of a target you're aiming for that you're not there, and so you're acting in ways to solve that problem, whatever. It could be
maybe getting a paycheck, finding something that you can tolerate if it's not your real purpose, and getting that paycheck so that you can carry on.
Yeah.
I mean, these things are sort of obvious, but religion tries to mystify everything.
Religion tries to make it top down, and here we are asking the big daddy, tell me what I need to do in life, when really, then you don't own the purpose. It's like given to you.
And Rick Warren is particularly offensive. in the way that he acts as if you're living your life for a deity only. That's your purpose.
And that this life is just a preparation. It doesn't really matter. And you see how a lot of evangelicals and a lot of fundamentalist type believers treat this life. There's an old gospel hymn, "This world is not my home, I'm just a passing through. My treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue." I remember singing that in Sunday school. And it's like cheapening this life. It's like this life is nothing in this world, in this environment. Whereas if we find and discover and create our own purpose for the problems we're trying to solve now, we own them. It's inside of us. We are the ones who decide. We get to drive the purpose. The purpose doesn't drive us, like Rick Warren said.
Well, also this idea that this is not our real life and there's going to be some better life is a very dangerous concept, of course, because it devalues life and it devalues the afterlife for our descendants. And I like to say the only afterlife that we should care about is leaving our descendants a secure and pleasant future, leaving our planet secure. And so you have all of these climate change deniers who are rabid religious right people. In the old days, the Reagan administration, Watt, who thought that we shouldn't take care of the environment. The dehumanization of people because it doesn't really matter what happens to slaves or women or oppressed people.
They'll be rewarded.
They'll be promised with pie in the sky. So not a very useful or helpful concept.
And not just other human beings, but kitty cats.
Well, at our house, we have a poster that we like. I think we have a photo of it. This is Alice Felker, who's a friend of ours who has a greeting card business. He also made this poster, and I can't read that. He said, "I once asked a 4-year-old the secret of life. Feed the kitties," she said. "Feed the kitties." And this is very charming, and it says a lot. You know, you got a hungry kitten, you feed it. You love it, you nurture it.
So purpose is found and created here on the ground where we live our life. You see a hungry kitty cat. You see a hungry human being. You see the starving children in Yemen right now, for example. How are we going to meet that challenge? So
pretty hard. Non-Belief Relief has given money to the UN World Food Fund for Africa, for 3 countries in Africa, including Yemen. But of course, it's a very tricky situation. We've given out almost $200,000 this year in charity. I mean, there are many ways that people help as volunteers, whether you give money or you actually give your time. There's a great purpose.
And a lot of people, a lot of atheists and agnostics, as well as believers, I mean, we're all living in the same planet, find purpose in trying to help with charity and with disaster victims and with inequality in the world or oppression or with war or whatever happens to hit us at the moment, and whatever talents you happen to have, whatever abilities or strength you might have as a human being, you can apply those toward meeting those goals, and there's purpose in that. It's not
but now, Dan, that's all a little bit highfalutin because not everybody's able to change the world. And to get back to the rabbi's idea of pleasure, which is actually very non-religious, we also want to enjoy our lives. And Robert Ingersoll, who is the great 19th century freethinker, had a creed, and it goes, the time to be happy is now, the place to be happy is here, the way to be happy is to make others happy. And of course, there's one drawback with that, in that women especially have been indoctrinated that their purpose traditionally is to make other people happy, and who is making them happy.
Yeah.
But assuming egalitarianism, this is a very lovely creed. So we don't want to forget enjoying life. So it's not just crusading and trying to help others altruistically. There are other things about life.
Yeah.
So I would agree with him. I don't think he got any of that out of the Bible.
Well, there's that old question. If the purpose of life is to make others happy, what's their purpose of life, right? Somewhere, somehow, somebody's got to actually be happy and enjoy your life, if you can. And the way to get there is to remove obstacles, to remove problems, to remove any obstruction toward that happiness for yourself and others and your kitty cats and your your loved ones.
And of course, Robert Ingersoll in the 19th century, I mean, although free thought was in flower in a small percentage of the population, there were great social movements. They were dealing with very fundamentalist, strict religion, especially Calvinism. These idea that you really shouldn't be happy in this world. It's a veil of tears, and everybody was sinners, and original sin, you didn't deserve happiness. So I think that that was part of his creed, was to counteract that. And today, I don't think Americans, for the most part, need to be told that they should pursue happiness. I think people are pursuing it all over the place in entertainment.
Well,
I don't really think that's the issue.
It's in our founding document, right? The pursuit of happiness.
Right.
But, well, we find it, I think most of us, through our family, through our spouse, through our children, through our grandchildren, the cute grandchildren we have, and that. And we also find it in, for me, besides that, music, playing jazz piano in a good combo. There's something magical that happens. It's just an enjoyable thing. But to get there, to be able to play jazz piano in a combo, there's a big struggle, and there's the problem to be solved of how do you get good at what you're doing. So there's purpose in that. There's purpose in developing yourself to get to this goal. And it's not just me that's happy, but I think the people listening are also enjoying the music as well. So we're sharing that purpose.
So I guess the only other thing to talk about would be the great purpose that many freethinkers have had in contributing to society, rather artistically. I mean, could you name some of the secular musicians that have contributed art to society?
Wow, there's dozens and dozens. You know, the Gershwins, and in fact, this week is the birthday of Ira Gershwin, the brother of George Gershwin, who wrote "It Ain't Necessarily So," all that great music. Classical composers like
Verdi?
Verdi, who was an altar boy, and he grew up to say, "Stay away from priests," and everyone knew he was an atheist.
Brahms?
And Brahms, Brahms, a total secular agnostic humanist who wrote not for the church but for himself.
Mozart left the Catholic religion.
Yeah.
Beethoven was a deist in the Enlightenment sense. All kinds of people who've contributed. Yip Harburg, when we look at the Great American Songbook, you were talking about the Gershwins, there's Cole Porter, Richard Rogers, Yip Harburg, who wrote everybody's favorite all-time musical.
Irving Berlin was an agnostic humanist. So
I didn't get to say, I lost my voice. The Wizard of Oz, he wrote the music for the Wizard of Oz, so Somewhere Over the Rainbow.
Somewhere Over the Rainbow.
And he was a very ardent agnostic.
And he worked hard. He found purpose. He sometimes spent 2 weeks trying to find one word. The word somewhere, and Somewhere Over the Rainbow was the last word he wrote for that song. And he couldn't find the word, and he worked and worked. So there's real purpose in trying to solve a problem that you're trying to create something beautiful in life.
And of course, so many writers, so many other kinds of artists have been freethinkers, many, many famous people. People would be shocked to know how many of the greatest writers and artists really were non-religious, are non-religious. And then, of course, those working for social progress. When we look at someone like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was the first to call for women's right to vote, and she was leading the women's movement. She really started the movement with children at her knee. You know, she had 7 children. And an ardent agnostic and a huge critic of religion who wrote the Woman's Bible. And so many other women like her started the women's movement. When we look at the early abolitionists, Thomas Paine, the word infidel was synonymous with abolitionist because so many of the early dissenters from religion were those calling for the end to slavery. We've seen the people working against capital punishment, for humane treatment of the mentally ill, for women's reproductive rights, and on. Margaret Sanger. So many of wonderful, progressive, non-religious people who have made major contributions to society and really have had that purpose in life.
And all of that was trying to solve a problem. Women couldn't vote. Slaves were not free. Women couldn't control their reproductive future. It's a problem in life that we're trying to correct and solve. And there's great purpose, not of life, but purpose in life when you find those problems that you're trying to resolve.
Well, I think we've kind of touched on all the major points of a very heavy philosophical topic.
Were there any questions, Lauren, that came in before? No questions came in before? Well, if you do have a question
or a comment
to make, you can still make it right now, and we will look at it, we'll see it. and we'll very likely respond in a future show to any questions you have about this. And I'm sure not all atheists agree with each other, but you heard us explain how we might address the question, what is the purpose of life?
And tune in next week for a live Ask an Atheist, and it will be noon Central Time on Wednesdays, FFRS Ask an Atheist. Thanks for joining us.